Good morning.
The tough talk from the Bush administration about Iran and its nuclear program has ratcheted up in recent weeks.
But if you're interested in avoiding World War III, it seems like you ought to be interested in preventing them from having the knowledge necessary to make a nuclear weapon.
And last week came unilateral economic sanctions against the Tehran regime aimed at its military. But the director of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Mohammad El-Baradei, said yesterday there is no evidence of an Iranian drive for the bomb at this time. His group is now in Tehran meeting with Iranian officials.
The world's top nuclear inspector.
He was interviewed on CNN yesterday.
We are not talking about Iran having today a nuclear weapon. We are trying to make sure that the future intention of Iran is peaceful. And that's really what we are talking about. We have the time, because I don't see any other solution, Wolf, except through diplomacy and inspection.
Last week, Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad again insisted his country had a right to peaceful nuclear power and said it would not bow to bullying by Western leaders.
They are mistaken if they suppose that by using a political, psychological duress against the Iranian nation, they can deprive it of any right. That is impossible.
What to do about Iran?
Political allies of the Bush administration took to the airwaves yesterday to make their case that the Iranians, in fact, are working toward a bomb.
They're trying to develop a nuclear weapon program, not peaceful nuclear power. So I'm taking the Iranian president at his word. Their actions speak louder than anything else. They're clearly going down the uranium enrichment road that would lead to weapons material, not peaceful nuclear power.
But on several of the Sunday talk shows, congressional Democrats urged caution, both in words and deeds. Connecticut Senator and presidential candidate Christopher Dodd appeared on NBC yesterday.
You think we're getting precariously close to military action?
I do. I think clearly the administration seems to be pointing in that direction. And I think that's a dangerous move at this juncture here. And again, I'm not going to take a backseat to anyone on my concerns about the problems that Iran poses here. And I would not exclude the use of military force in dealing with that. But it seems to me that arrow ought not to be drawn out of our quiver until we examine and explore fully the opportunities to reduce those threats.
Fellow Senator and Republican presidential contender John McCain of Arizona was asked about Iran on ABC.
We cannot allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon. But I do believe that to start talking about specifics, a bombardment or something like that, I think would be a terrible mistake. But the Iranians would know when I'm president, they're facing somebody who's not going to let them have it. But I'm not going to make a lot of empty threats that I can't carry out.
And the debate goes on outside Congress with perhaps even more intensity. Commentary magazine editor Norman Podhoretz wrote in June that military force was required to stop Iran from getting a bomb, and offered this description of Iranian President Ahmadinejad, quote, "Like Hitler, he is a revolutionary whose objective is to overturn the going international system and to replace it with a new order dominated by Iran and ruled by the religio-political culture of Islamo-fascism," end quote. Newsweek international editor Fareed Zakaria responded recently to Podhoretz, writing, "For this staggering proposition, Podhoretz provides not a scintilla of evidence." And Zakaria wrote, "The American discussion about Iran has lost all connection to reality." And now these two writers join us. Norman Podhoretz is editor-at-large of Commentary magazine. His latest book is World War IV, The Long Struggle Against Islamo-Fascism. He is also a foreign policy advisor to Republican presidential candidate Rudy Giuliani. Fareed Zakaria is editor of Newsweek International. His latest book is The Future of Freedom, Illiberal Democracy at Home and Abroad. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us. Norman Podhoretz, let me begin with you. You wrote over the summer that if Iran is to be prevented from going ahead with a nuclear program, then the United States has no alternative but to strike against Iran. Do you still believe that, and if so, why?
Well, very much so. It seems to me that most people in the world, at least until recently, agreed that it would be catastrophic to allow the Iranians to develop a nuclear capability. The only debate was over what the best means to prevent this from happening might be. Well, for over 4 years, diplomacy has been tried, first by the Europeans and then with some American participation, and all they've accomplished, these negotiations, is to buy the Iranians more time with which to move forward inexorably toward a nuclear capability. The other hope has been vested in sanctions, and of course there have been 2 rounds of sanctions voted by the Security Council, neither of them very tough because the Russians and the Chinese are opposed to really tough sanctions. We've now unilaterally imposed, just the other day, a new round of sanctions involving the banks and the financial system. But as a good report in the Washington Post this morning indicates, most experts on Iran think that these are not going to bite sufficiently and certainly not going to make the Iranians change their behavior. So that leaves us with only one terrible choice, which is either to bomb those facilities and retard their program or even cut it off altogether, or allow them to go nuclear. And I agree with what Senator McCain has said in the past. The only thing worse than bombing Iran is to allow Iran to get the bomb.
Fareed Zakaria, the choice, either strike Iran or allow them to go nuclear, are those the only 2 choices?
Well, there is a third choice, Judy, which is the choice we have used for pretty much every other country that has developed nuclear weapons, and that is deterrence. We allowed Mao to get a nuclear weapon and have used deterrence against them, against the Chinese. We allowed the Russians, the Soviet Union, to get nuclear weapons and use deterrence against them. We've allowed the North Koreans to get nuclear weapons and have used deterrence against them. It used to be that one had to explain deterrence to the left. It has now become something the right does not understand. You know, Mao Zedong was a much more revolutionary figure than Ahmadinejad is. China was actively helping insurgencies all over the world that were anti-American, killing Americans in Vietnam, in Korea. Mao spoke actively about his great desire to overturn the international system. He even talked about destroying half the world to allow communism to triumph. And yet, you know what? The desire for self-preservation meant that Mao Zedong was deterred, the Soviet Union was deterred, North Korea is being deterred. We have a policy that we understand, which is containment plus deterrence. We're using sanctions, we're using a kind of anti-Iranian alliance mechanism in the Middle East, which has become quite successful, by the way. We have isolated Iran. Time is not on their side. Time is on our side. I think that the onus surely must be on the other side to explain to us why, because Iran might gain the knowledge to make nuclear weapons in the next 3 to 5 to 8 years, we should launch a unilateral American invasion. This would be the 3rd invasion of a Muslim country that the United States would have undertaken in the last 5 years. That seems to me a pretty serious business. And we've seen deterrence work against all these other countries.
Well, let me ask...
Let us even assume that Iran gets the bomb. And it's not clear that it will. Why are they more crazy than Kim Jong-il, a man who let 2 million of his own people starve in the last decade?
Well, you've posed several